I'm Ethan Mitchell, I'm 29 years old, and at my own brother's wedding, he told me I was an embarrassment to the family right in front of everyone. Before I tell you about how I walked out of that room and came back to leave them all speechless, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like tiny, sharp insults. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and lilies, so thick it felt hard to breathe. I stood near a marble pillar, watching the sea of tailored suits and silk dresses swirl around the dance floor. It was a world of perfect smiles and quiet, confident laughter. It was my brother's world. It had never been mine. My brother, Marcus, was the center of it all. He stood next to his new bride, Vanessa, looking every bit the golden son he'd always been. His smile was effortless, his posture perfect. He belonged here. I, on the other hand, felt like a forgery, a cheap knockoff in a room full of masterpieces. My rented suit felt stiff, my tie felt like a noose, and every polite nod from a passing guest felt like an inspection I was failing. The moment of reckoning came when the wedding planner announced it was time for the main course. People started moving towards their assigned tables, their names written in elegant gold script on little cards. I saw the main family table, a grand affair right next to the dance floor. My mother, Elizabeth, was already seated, adjusting her pearls. My father, Richard, was laughing at something a senator said. And there was Marcus, pulling out the chair for Vanessa. There was an empty seat. For a split second, a stupid, foolish part of me thought it was for me. I took a step towards it, my heart doing a nervous flutter. Maybe this was it. The moment of inclusion I'd been waiting for my entire life. But Marcus saw me. His smile tightened. He moved swiftly, intercepting me before I could get within 10 feet of the table. He leaned in close, his voice a venomous hiss that no one else could hear. "What do you think you're doing?" "There's an empty seat," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I thought." His eyes, the same blue as mine but glacial and cold, narrowed into slits. "You can't sit here," he spat, each word a tiny, sharp dagger. "That's for Senator Blackwell. You are an embarrassment to this family. Go sit where you were assigned." The air left my lungs. The background noise of the party faded into a dull roar. He didn't just say it, he meant it. I could see it in the rigid set of his jaw, in the disgust that flashed across his face before he smoothed it over with a practiced smile for a passing guest. I looked past him at my mother, who was now intently studying her water glass. I looked at my father, who suddenly found the pattern on his plate fascinating. They heard, they knew, and they did nothing. A cold calm settled over me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger, not yet. It was something else. A kind of final, chilling clarity. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to didn't just break. It vaporized. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked him straight in the eye and gave him a single, sharp nod. "All right," I said. My voice was unervingly steady. Then I turned my back on him, on the family table, on the whole damn charade, and walked. Not to my assigned table in the back, near the kitchen doors. I walked straight past the dance floor, past the curious and pitying stares, and headed directly for the grand double doors of the ballroom. I didn't know if I was leaving for good, or if I had another plan. All I knew was that the Ethan who had walked in here hoping for a crumb of acceptance was gone forever. To understand why I didn't just break down or start a fight right there, you have to understand Fairfield, Connecticut. Or at least my family's version of it. Our house was a sprawling colonial with perfect black shutters and a lawn so obsessively manicured it looked like a green carpet. It was a town of white picket fences and parent-teacher associations and unspoken social hierarchies. It was a town built for people like my brother, Marcus. Marcus was born 3 years before me, and it seemed like he came into the world pre-approved. Golden hair that fell perfectly without trying, blue eyes, an easy charm that made adults coo and teachers forgive anything. He was the embodiment of my parents' dreams. I remember being 8 years old, sitting on the cold metal bleachers at the high school football field. The air was crisp with autumn, smelling of cut grass and popcorn. The entire town, it seemed, was there to watch Marcus, the star quarterback, lead the team to a state championship. When he threw the winning touchdown pass, the crowd erupted. My father was screaming, his face red with pride. My mother was weeping with joy. They lifted Marcus onto their shoulders. A conquering hero returned from war. I just sat there, a small, forgotten figure on the bleachers, clapping because I was supposed to. That night, at a celebration dinner, Marcus's giant trophy sat in the center of the table. My father gave a speech about his son's dedication and leadership. I had gotten a B- on a math test that day, and when I'd shown it to my dad earlier, he just sighed and said, "Marcus never got a B- in math. Ethan, you need to apply yourself." Sitting there, listening to the praise being heaped on my brother, I felt invisible. And then there was me. I was the rough draft, the project that got abandoned. My hair was a curly, untamable mess that my mother was always trying to slick down. My knuckles were perpetually scraped from climbing the old oak tree in our backyard, the one I was forbidden from climbing. I was the kid who brought a bucket of frogs into the kitchen because I wanted to see if they could swim in the sink, resulting in my mother shrieking and my father grounding me for a week. I was the one who, in Sunday school, asked the pastor why, if God was everywhere, we had to come to this boring building every week. The question earned me a sharp pinch on the arm from my mother and a lecture in the car about respect. My report cards were a recurring nightmare for my parents. They always contained the same damning phrase, a subtle variation on a theme. Ethan is a bright boy, but he questions authority. Ethan has potential, but he struggles to fit in with his peers. He needs to focus more, like his brother. Why can't you be more like Marcus? That question wasn't just a question. It was the soundtrack to my childhood. It was the constant, low-grade fever of my existence. It was in the disappointed sighs from my mother when I came home with mud on the knees of my nice pants. It was in the tight, thin line of my father's lips when he looked at my messy art project next to Marcus's perfectly constructed diorama. They didn't hate me. In their own suffocating way, I suppose they loved me. But they didn't understand me. I was a puzzle they couldn't solve, and frankly, they didn't have the patience to try. Marcus was easy. He fit the mold they had created. I seemed determined to smash it. My only refuge, my only sanctuary, was my Uncle Frank's house. Frank was my dad's older brother, a Vietnam vet who lived on the other, less polished side of town. His house smelled of motor oil, old books, and strong coffee. It was wonderfully, gloriously messy and lived in and real. While my house had pristine white walls adorned with professionally taken family portraits, his walls were covered in maps with pins in them and old, faded photographs of him and his army buddies, their arms thrown around each other, grinning in the jungle heat. He never once, not a single time, told me to be more like Marcus. I remember one particular afternoon. I was 12, and I'd gotten into trouble at school for arguing with a history teacher about the official narrative of the Gulf War. My father, a respected surgeon who valued order above all else, was apoplectic. "You show respect, young man. You don't challenge your elders. You listen and you learn what you are told," he'd yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. Humiliated and angry, I jumped on my bike and ridden the 3 miles to Uncle Frank's, tears of frustration blurring the road. He was in his garage, a sacred space filled with tools and the half-disassembled engine of his old Ford pickup. He listened patiently as the whole story tumbled out of me, his hands methodically wiping grease from a wrench with a worn rag. When I was done, my voice thick with unshed tears, he looked at me, his eyes kind but deadly serious. "There's nothing wrong with seeing the world different, kid," he said, his voice a low rumble. "In fact, it's necessary. The trick ain't in being quiet. The trick is to have the guts to stand by what you see. Don't ever let 'em grind you down into something you ain't." He then handed me a wrench. "Now make yourself useful. Pass me the September 16th th. He taught me that honor wasn't about getting good grades or being popular. It was about being true to your own compass, even if it pointed you in a direction nobody else understood. That compass led me to a place my family would never comprehend. The real break, the moment the crack in our family turned into an unbridgeable canyon, happened my senior year of high school. While everyone else was obsessing over college applications and SAT scores, I walked into a sterile, unnaturally quiet recruiting office downtown. The air smelled of clean carpets and a kind of fierce, unwavering patriotism. I sat across from a Marine gunnery sergeant in his crisp dress uniform, a man whose posture was straighter than any I'd ever seen. He didn't sell me a dream. He sold me a challenge. He promised it would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. I signed my name on the dotted line. I chose to tell my family at dinner that night. It was a Tuesday. We were having pot roast, my father's favorite. I remember the smell of it, the way the silence that followed my announcement seemed to suck all the warmth and oxygen out of the room. I simply said, "I'm not going to college next fall. I've enlisted in the Marine Corps. I ship out for Paris Island in July." My mother, Elizabeth, dropped her fork. It clattered against her fine china plate with a sound like a gunshot in the silent room. My father, Richard, who was pouring himself some water, missed his glass entirely, spilling a cold puddle onto the polished oak table that he didn't even seem to notice. But it was Marcus, home from his freshman year at Princeton and already cloaked in an aura of Ivy League superiority, who spoke first. He looked at me, not with shock, but with a kind of cold, clinical disgust. "You're throwing your life away," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "You're embarrassing this family. Mitchells are doctors and lawyers. We don't do that kind of work." That kind of work. Like it was dirty. Like it was something to be ashamed of. Like I was joining a gang instead of the most respected fighting force in the world. The only person who understood was Uncle Frank. He came over the next day. He found me in the backyard, trying to process the fallout from the night before. He didn't say much. He just pulled me into a rough, strong hug that smelled of sawdust and old flannel, and clapped me hard on the back. "You'll find your real brothers there, kid," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You go and make us proud." It was the only blessing I got. It was the only one I needed. The next 8 years were a lifetime. I went to Paris Island and they broke me down, stripped away the confused kid from Connecticut, and built me back up into something stronger, something with purpose. I found the brotherhood Uncle Frank had promised, a bond forged in sweat, mud, and the shared, unspoken fear in the belly of a C-130 flying into hostile territory. I served 2 tours. I drove a Humvee through the dusty, treacherous streets of Fallujah, where every window felt like a sniper's nest and every piece of trash on the road could be an IED. I was in Kandahar, where the relentless heat was a physical presence and the danger was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of everyday life. I was ambushed. I carried a wounded friend through a hail of gunfire, his blood warm and sticky on my uniform, his pained breathing loud in my ear. I learned what real sacrifice was, what real honor meant. It had nothing to do with trophies or grades. And while I was doing that, Marcus was living a different life, the one my parents had designed. He graduated with honors from Princeton, then went to Harvard Law. He got a prestigious job at a high-powered law firm in Manhattan. He got engaged to Vanessa Hamilton, the daughter of a state senator, a woman who looked like she'd been born in a Brooks Brothers catalog. He was collecting accolades, building a life of polished perfection. I was collecting scars, some on the outside that I could see, but most on the inside where they were heavier. Every time I came home on leave, the distance between us grew wider. The hugs from my parents were stiff and brief. The conversations were a minefield of things we couldn't say. They'd ask polite, generic questions about my work, and I'd give polite, generic answers. We were strangers living under the same roof, speaking entirely different languages. My world of discipline, sacrifice, and brutal honesty had no place in their world of cocktail parties and social maneuvering. So when that wedding invitation arrived, a thick, cream-colored card with impossibly elegant gold lettering, I was stunned. It felt like a summons from another universe. And inside, that handwritten note from Marcus. For simple, devastatingly effective words. Let's start over, brother. Hope is a stubborn, stupid thing. After a decade of being pushed away, of being treated like the family's dirty little secret, that little note felt like a lifeline. Felt like a truce. Maybe he meant it. Maybe, after all this time, we could finally bridge that canyon between us. Maybe he was finally ready to see me, not as the family screw-up, but as his brother. I said yes. I got leave approved. I bought a new suit, a navy one that I hoped looked respectable enough. I flew to Connecticut, my heart filled with a cautious, fragile optimism. I was ready to be the brother he wanted me to be. I was ready to meet him halfway. The delusion didn't last long. Walking back into that reception hall felt like stepping onto a stage. I had put on my costume, the well-fitting navy suit, and my mask of polite indifference. The cocktail hour was in full swing, a symphony of forced laughter and the clinking of ice in glasses. The room was beautiful, filled with flowers and candlelight, but it felt cold, artificial. I grabbed a club soda from a passing waiter and tried to look like I belonged. A task I knew was nearly impossible. It didn't take long for the first volley to be fired. I saw Marcus across the room, holding court with a circle of men in expensive suits. One of them was Senator Hamilton, Vanessa's father, a man with a politician's perfect teeth and cold, calculating eyes. Marcus caught my eye for a fraction of a second, and in that glance, I saw a flicker of annoyance, a silent command. Stay away, blend in, don't mess this up for me. The message was received. I was a potential liability, a piece on the board that needed to be carefully managed. I turned away from that silent dismissal and found myself face to face with the groomsman. Blake, the ringleader with the perfect hair and the overly expensive watch, clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. There he is. The war hero, he boomed, his voice loud enough to make several people turn and look. He was performing, using me as a prop in his social theater. Tell us, Ethan, you must have some crazy stories. Ever, take someone out. He winked, a sleazy, conspiratorial gesture. His friends, Trevor and Carter, snickered into their drinks. They leaned in, their eyes gleaming with a kind of morbid, detached curiosity. It wasn't a question of genuine interest. It was a taunt, a way of painting me as some kind of brutish spectacle for their amusement, a barbarian in their civilized world. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but I kept my face impassive. We're just here to celebrate Marcus and Vanessa, I said, my voice deliberately level and calm. Let's keep the focus on them tonight. Oh, right, Carter chimed in, swirling the amber whiskey in his glass. God forbid we make the Hamiltons uncomfortable with talk of all that unpleasantness overseas. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. They were making it clear that my reality had no place here. So, what's it like? Trevor pressed, leaning closer. I mean, do you guys just yell at each other all day? Like in the movies? I just looked at him, at his soft, pampered face, and I felt a wave of profound exhaustion. How could I even begin to explain my life to someone like him? How could I describe the bone-deep loyalty, the gut-wrenching fear, the sacred bond between soldiers? It would be like trying to describe the color blue to a man born blind. It's a different world, I said simply, giving them nothing. I nodded politely. If you'll excuse me. I extricated myself from the circle, the heat of their condescending amusement burning on my back. I spent the next hour drifting through the glittering crowd, feeling more and more like a ghost. I made small talk with a great-aunt who couldn't seem to remember my name, calling me Martin twice. I had a brief, excruciating conversation with a cousin who only wanted to talk about his new boat and how much it cost to moor it. It was a masterclass in feeling completely and utterly invisible. The worst moment, the one that truly crystallized my status in this world, came when one of Vanessa's bridesmaids, a woman named Jessica with a predatory smile and sharp, assessing eyes, cornered me by the raw bar. You're Marcus's brother, right? She asked, her gaze sweeping over me from head to toe, clearly calculating my worth. "The soldier." She said the word like it was something exotic and slightly dangerous, like lion tamer or volcano explorer. "I'm a sergeant in the Marine Corps," I corrected gently. "Fascinating," she purred, stepping a little closer, her perfume cloying. "So what do you do when you're not, soldiering?" "I lead a team of riflemen. We train, we prepare, we deploy when our country asks us to." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Oh, so it's not like a 9-to-5 job, then?" "No, it's a 24/7 commitment." "And your dad, he's a surgeon, right? And Marcus is a partner at that huge law firm in the city. So, what's your plan? When you're done playing army, the question hung in the air between us, dripping with dismissive judgment. Playing army, as if the last 8 years of my life, the friends I'd lost, the things I'd seen, the metal in my leg, were all part of some childish game I would eventually grow out of. She wasn't asking about my future. She was assessing my net worth, my social standing, my suitability as a potential contact in her world. And I was coming up woefully short. "I'm a career Marine," I said, my tone hardening just enough to put a crack in her polished veneer. "That is the plan." "Oh," she said, her eyes glazing over with a lack of interest that was almost comical. She suddenly spotted someone over my shoulder, her face lighting up with a brilliant, false smile. "Well, it was so great meeting you. I just saw a friend I absolutely have to say hi to." And just like that, she was gone, swallowed back into the glittering crowd, leaving me standing alone again. The message was loud and clear. You are not one of us. You have nothing to offer. I knew I had one last move to make. One final, desperate attempt to see if there was anything left to salvage. This couldn't be how it was. This couldn't be what Marcus meant by, "Let's start over." I scanned the room, my eyes searching for him. I saw him for a moment standing alone near the towering, 7-tiered wedding cake, waiting for Vanessa to join him for the ceremonial cutting. This was my chance. My last chance. My heart was pounding a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs as I crossed the room. This was it. No more games, no more pretending. Just a brother talking to his brother. I reached him and touched his arm, my hand feeling strangely heavy. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice low so as not to cause a scene. "Can we just talk? For 5 minutes? Please, this is important to me." He flinched, pulling his arm away as if my touch had burned him. He glanced nervously over his shoulder towards the main table where the Hamiltons sat like royalty on their thrones. "Ethan, not now," he hissed, his jaw tight. "I'm busy. We're about to cut the cake." "After the cake, then," I pressed, a desperate edge creeping into my voice that I hated. "I'm not asking for much. Just talk to me, like a brother." The look he gave me then was one of pure, undiluted exasperation. It was the same look he used to give me when I was 10 and accidentally broke one of his precious trophies. It was a look that said, "You are an inconvenience. You are a problem to be managed." "What is there to talk about?" he snapped, his voice a low, angry growl. "I'm getting married. This is my day. My one day. Can you not make it about you for once in your life? Just do what you're supposed to do. Smile, clap, and for God's sake, don't embarrass me." He saw Vanessa approaching, her face a radiant smile, and his own face instantly transformed. The scowl was replaced by a dazzling, loving look. "Hey, honey," he said to her, his voice warm and sweet, completely ignoring the brother standing right next to him. He turned his back on me. That was it. That was the final confirmation. The last ember of hope didn't just die. He had ground it into dust with the heel of his $1,000 patent leather shoe. I stood there for a moment, frozen. But it wasn't a freeze of shock or hurt anymore. It was the cold, hard calm of a decision locking irrevocably into place. My strategic contingency plan was no longer a possibility. It was now the mission, The dinner announcement that followed was just background noise. The walk towards the main table, the sight of the empty chair, the final public insult, it all happened in a kind of surreal slow motion. When Marcus delivered his final public humiliation, it was almost an out-of-body experience. I heard the words, "You can't sit here. You're an embarrassment to this family." But they didn't cut me. They couldn't. There was nothing left to cut. They were just noise, the final piece of intelligence I needed before executing my plan. My quiet "all right" and my firm nod weren't acts of submission. They were acknowledgments. Message received. Understood. As I turned and walked towards the ballroom doors, I felt a strange and terrible peace settle over me. The pressure was off. The exhausting need to pretend, to hope, to try, it was all gone. I was no longer a guest at my brother's wedding. I was a man on a mission, and I knew with absolute certainty exactly what I had to do. The suit was coming off. The real me was about to walk back into that room, and they were not going to know what hit them. The heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind me, and the muffled sound of the party, the music and the laughter, was instantly cut off. The hallway was cool and mercifully quiet, a blessed relief from the oppressive heat and suffocating perfume of the reception. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back. My walk was steady, my purpose clear as glass. Each step on the polished marble floor was a deliberate drumbeat, counting down to the moment everything would irrevocably change. As I headed for the main entrance, a figure detached itself from the shadows near a large, ornate painting. It was Sarah, Vanessa's sister. She was standing alone, holding a glass of champagne she wasn't drinking, looking as out of place and as uncomfortable as I felt. She saw me, and her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Ethan, are you okay? Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice a soft, welcome intrusion in the silence. I paused for a beat, a small courtesy to the only person who had shown me any real kindness all weekend. In her eyes, I saw the same straightforward honesty I'd seen at the rehearsal dinner. She was an ally whether she knew it or not in enemy territory. "Just stepping out for some air," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. The air in that room had become toxic. "It's a little stuffy in there." She gave a small, sad smile of complete understanding. "Tell me about it. What Marcus said to you." "I saw. The whole table saw. It was awful, Ethan. I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, Sarah," I told her, and I meant it. "But thank you." That small moment of human connection, that simple validation from a near stranger, was like a final sip of water before a long, arduous march. It mattered more than she could ever know. It solidified my resolve. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. The injustice was real. I gave her a small, firm nod, a silent promise that I was okay, more than okay, and continued on my way. The valet, a young kid with tired eyes, brought my rental car around. It was a generic silver sedan, the automotive equivalent of my rented suit. Anonymous. Forgettable. The cool night air felt good on my face as I tipped the kid and got in the car. I didn't drive away. I just sat there for a long minute in the enveloping silence of the parking lot, the distant, faint sounds of the party filtering through the glass. This was it. The point of no return. I took a deep breath. I got out and walked around to the trunk. I popped it open, and there it was, lying flat in its protective plastic sheath. My garment bag. I unzipped it carefully, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet lot. The deep, rich blue of my dress blues seemed to absorb the faint light from the parking lot lamps. It didn't look like fabric. It looked like a slice of midnight sky. Changing in the cramped back seat of a rental car was not the most dignified moment of my life, but it felt like the most important. Felt like a sacred ritual. With methodical, deliberate movements, I stripped off the suit, the costume. It felt flimsy and foreign, a skin that didn't belong to me. I folded it and tossed it onto the passenger seat without a second thought, a final shedding of their expectations. Then I began the transformation, the reclamation. I pulled on the crisp white shirt, the fabric cool against my skin. Then the high-waisted, sky blue trousers with their iconic red blood stripe running down the leg, a symbol of the bloodshed at the Battle of Chapultepec, a reminder of the Corps' long and storied history. They felt familiar, comfortable. They felt like a part of me. The jacket was last. It was heavy, not just with the weight of the wool, but with the weight of tradition and responsibility. As I slid my arms into it, I felt a physical change in my posture. My shoulders, which had been hunched in deference all night, squared and straightened. My back became a steel rod. I fastened the gleaming brass buttons, each one a small, satisfying click that echoed in the quiet car. They were polished to a mirror shine, just as they were supposed to be. Perfect. Not my parents' version of perfect, but the Corps' version. Then came the decorations. This wasn't about vanity. This wasn't about showing off. This was about telling a story. My story. The one they had tried so hard to erase, to hide away in the back of the room. I pinned the rifle and sharpshooter badges to my pocket. Simple. Direct. Earned through hours of sweat and discipline on the range. Then came the ribbons, a colorful, silent testament on my left breast. Each one was a chapter in my life. The Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. The Sea Service Deployment Ribbon with 2 bronze stars, one for each tour. The Afghanistan and Iraq campaign medals, each with their own campaign stars. They were a map of my last 8 years, a map that had taken me through places they only saw on the news. Finally, the medals themselves, the ones worn only on the most formal occasions. I picked up the first one, its purple ribbon and bronze heart-shaped pendant feeling cool and solid against my thumb. The Purple Heart. The profile of General George Washington was stoic and stern. I thought of the deafening blast of the IED, the searing heat, the shrapnel that had torn through the flesh of my leg, and the faces of the men, my brothers, who had dragged me out of the wreckage. I pinned it carefully to my jacket. Then I picked up the second one, the Bronze Star Medal. It felt heavier in my hand, its weight more than just metal. This one wasn't for being wounded. It was for what I did in spite of it. For my actions during a 3-hour firefight after an ambush in Fallujah, for taking command when my squad leader went down, for coordinating fire and maneuver under intense pressure, for getting every single one of my men back to the wire alive. I thought of the noise, the choking dust, the smoke, the fear so thick you could taste it like copper in your mouth, and the absolute, ice-cold clarity of purpose that had cut through it all. I pinned it right below the ribbons. The transformation was complete. I didn't have a full-length mirror, only the car's small rear view. I leaned over the front seat and looked at my reflection. It wasn't Marcus's screw-up brother staring back at me. It wasn't the awkward guest from Table 19. It wasn't the guy who was playing Army. It was Sergeant Ethan Mitchell, United States Marine Corps. The uniform wasn't a costume. It was my skin. The medals weren't decorations. They were my scars and my triumphs, worn on the outside for all the world to see. A deep, quiet, unshakable resolve settled in my soul. I wasn't going back in there to start a fight. I wasn't going back in there to make a scene. I was going back in there to report for duty, to stand as a living, breathing testament to the life I had chosen and the man I had become. My very presence would be their reckoning. I put on my white peaked cap, ensuring the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem was perfectly centered. I got out of the car and locked it, the electronic beep echoing in the quiet lot. I straightened my jacket. My posture was perfect. My gait was steady. My mission was clear. I was going back to that ballroom, and I was going to finish this. I pushed open the heavy ballroom doors. This time, they didn't just swing open. They seemed to fly open, announcing my arrival with a silent, dramatic flourish. I stepped across the threshold, and it was like a switch had been flipped on the entire building's power grid. Everything just stopped. The band was playing some soft, inoffensive jazzy tune. It faltered, a saxophone squeaking into a pathetic silence. The low hum of 500 conversations, the little discussions about business deals and summer vacations and golf scores, died out in a cascading wave, starting from the tables nearest the door and spreading like a shock wave of silence across the entire room. In the sudden, Dead quiet. A fork clattered against a plate somewhere in the back. The sound as loud and shocking as a thunderclap. 500 pairs of eyes turned to me. 500 forks paused halfway to 500 mouths. I stood there for a long moment, just inside the doorway, letting them look. I let them drink in the sight they had refused to see, the truth they had so desperately tried to ignore. I was no longer the awkward relative in the ill-fitting suit, the family secret to be hidden at table 19. I was a monument to a world they knew nothing about, standing in the full, undeniable glory of my United States Marine Corps dress blues. My eyes, trained for quick and accurate assessment of any terrain, scanned the room. I saw the groomsmen, Blake, Trevor, and Carter, their smug smiles frozen and then melting off their faces, their mouths slightly agape like fish gasping for air. I saw Vanessa, the beautiful bride, her perfectly painted red lips parted in a silent, horrified "oh." Her hand, adorned with a diamond the size of a small rock, flew to her pearls, a gesture of pure, unadulterated shock. Her parents, the senator and his wife, looked utterly bewildered, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning indignation, as if a creature from another planet had just beamed into the middle of their perfectly orchestrated party. Then my gaze found the main table, my family. My mother's face was as white as the tablecloth. She looked like she had seen a ghost, her hands clasped in her lap so tightly her knuckles were bone white. She was shrinking in her chair, trying to become invisible. And my father, his reaction was the one that stopped my breath. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. They weren't just looking at the uniform. They were cataloging it, reading it like a book he'd never bothered to open. I saw his gaze drop from my face to the colorful stack of ribbons on my left breast, then lower, to the 2 medals hanging beneath them. His eyes, the eyes of a surgeon trained to notice every detail, locked onto the Purple Heart, and then onto the Bronze Star. His lips moved, forming a word I couldn't hear but understood perfectly. Fallujah. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes I hadn't seen in 20 years. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was a dawning, horrified understanding. It was shame. Deep, profound, soul-shaking shame. I saw him glance instinctively at his own brother's empty seat at another, lesser table. Uncle Frank, I suddenly remembered with a fresh pang of anger, hadn't even been invited to the wedding ceremony itself, only the reception, another calculated slight. My father's face crumpled slightly, as if the immense weight of 2 generations of failure had just landed squarely on his shoulders. He had failed his brother, the Vietnam vet whose service had been a source of family embarrassment. And now he understood, in this horrifyingly public moment, that he had been failing his own son in exactly the same way. But it was Marcus who moved first. Of course it was. He shot up from his chair, his face a mask of incandescent rage and utter, profound humiliation. He stormed towards me, his $1,000 shoes silent on the thick, plush carpet. He was a missile of fury aimed directly at me. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" he seethed, his voice a low, vicious growl meant only for me, but in the dead, expectant silence of the room, it carried like a shout. "You're ruining my wedding. You're making a scene." I didn't flinch. I didn't move a muscle. I stood my ground as he came to a stop just a foot in front of me. I looked at my older brother, the golden child, the man who had everything, and for the first time in my entire life, I didn't see someone superior. I saw someone small, someone brittle, someone weak. Before I could answer him, another movement caught my eye. Across the room, an older man in a simple but elegant gray suit was getting to his feet. He was tall and lean, with a full head of white hair and the unmistakable, ramrod-straight bearing of a lifelong military man. It was Colonel William Hayes, retired, Vanessa's great-uncle, a man I had heard spoken of in hushed, respectful tones. The colonel didn't say a word. He simply stood at his table, his back straight as a flagpole, and in a gesture of profound, shocking respect that changed the entire dynamic of the room, he brought his hand up in a crisp, perfect, textbook salute. The entire room, a room full of bankers and lawyers and politicians and socialites, seemed to hold its collective breath. They didn't understand the ribbons on my chest, but they understood that. They understood the gravitas of that simple, powerful gesture. They understood respect when they saw it. My training, ingrained in every fiber of my being, kicked in. Automatically, my body responded. I brought my own hand up, my movements sharp and precise, my arm a straight line from my shoulder to my brow, and I returned the colonel's salute. In that moment, we weren't a guest and a relative at a wedding. We were two soldiers, two brothers in arms, acknowledging a shared code of honor in a room that had none. I lowered my hand and finally turned my full attention back to my sputtering, furious brother. My voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear and steady and cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "You were right, Marcus," I said. My words aimed at him but intended for the entire family table, for the entire room to hear. My place isn't here. I let that hang in the air for a beat, letting the truth of it sink in. My place, I continued, my gaze sweeping over my mother's stricken face and my father's horrified one, is where courage is honored, not hidden in the back of the room. My place is where sacrifice is respected, not called an embarrassment. I took a small step closer to him, lowering my voice so only he could hear the final, devastating blow, the words that would sever the last tie. "You wanted me to be someone else tonight. You wanted me to disappear. Congratulations. You got your wish. You don't have a brother anymore. You have a stranger in a uniform who is about to walk out of your life." I saw the impact of the words in his eyes. The anger was instantly extinguished, replaced by a flash of raw, animal panic, the look of a man who has just realized he has burned down his own house. He saw the abyss opening up between us, and he knew he was the one who had dug it. I held his gaze for one more second, a silent, final judgment. Then I said, my voice rising just enough for the whole room to hear, "I'm done here." I executed a perfect about-face, a parade ground turn that was both a gesture of profound contempt and a final, disciplined farewell. I started walking towards the doors, my back straight, my head held high. I could feel 500 pairs of eyes on my back, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care what any of them thought. I knew who I was, and now, finally, so did they. I didn't get far. I'd taken maybe 10 deliberate, rhythmic steps, the sound of my polished dress shoes on the marble floor the only noise in the cavernous, silent room. The double doors felt like they were a mile away. Each step was a step towards freedom, away from the suffocating atmosphere of their judgment. Then, behind me, a chair scraped loudly, violently, against the floor. "Ethan, wait." The voice was choked, unfamiliar in its brokenness. It was my father. I stopped, my hand just inches from the brass handle of the door. But I didn't turn around. Not yet. Couldn't. I stood there, my back to them all, a silent, unmoving statue in blue. I heard his footsteps, hurried and clumsy, not the confident stride of the successful surgeon, but the desperate shuffle of a man whose world was collapsing. He came to a stop just behind my shoulder. I could hear his ragged, shallow breathing. "Son," he began, his voice cracking on the single word. He reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. It was hesitant at first, then it gripped me with a surprising strength. It was trembling slightly. This was the first time he had touched me with anything other than a perfunctory pat on the back in more than a decade. I still didn't turn. If I looked at him, I was afraid the iron control I had forged in the back seat of that rental car would shatter into a million pieces. So he walked around me, planting himself in my path, forcing me to see him. His face was a complete wreck. The jovial, confident man from the start of the evening was gone, replaced by a pale, shattered old man. His eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, pleading anguish. They were fixed, not on my face, but on the bronze star pinned to my chest, as if it were a holy relic he was unworthy to look at. He didn't speak to me at first. He turned his head and looked back at the main table, at the epicenter of the disaster. He looked at Marcus, who was still standing there, frozen in a state of public humiliation, his face ashen. "What have you done?" my father whispered. But the whisper carried a fury that was more terrifying than any shout. He wasn't asking a question. It was a profound, soul-deep accusation. "My God, Marcus, what have you done?" He then turned his gaze to his wife, my mother, who was now openly weeping into her linen napkin, her shoulders shaking. "And you, Elizabeth," he said, his voice laced with a bitterness I'd never heard before. "You just sat there. You watched him do it. You let this happen. This was about more than just tonight." I could see it in the wild, desperate look in his eyes. This was about 1,000 small betrayals, a lifetime of looking the other way, a generation of prioritizing the golden child over the difficult one, all of it crashing down on him right now under the hot, unforgiving lights of this ballroom. He finally looked away from his broken family, and his eyes swept across the room, at the gawking faces of the Hamiltons and their powerful friends. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was louder, stronger, filled with a raw, righteous conviction that stunned me to my core. "I apologize," he said, not to me, but to the entire room, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "I apologize for my family's unforgivable behavior tonight. I apologize for our profound lack of judgment and our disrespect." He looked directly at Senator Hamilton, whose face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "My son, Ethan," my father declared, his voice rising with a pride I had never, ever heard directed at me, "is a decorated combat veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He is a hero. That uniform, and more importantly, the man wearing it, deserves more respect than anyone in this room, including, and especially, myself." A shocked murmur went through the crowd. Senator Hamilton's jaw tightened until a muscle jumped in his cheek. Vanessa looked like she was about to faint. My father had just thrown a tactical grenade into the middle of his precious son's carefully constructed social and political world. For the first time in my life, in public, in front of everyone, he had chosen me. He had defended me. He turned back to me then, his eyes pleading, desperate. "Don't go, Ethan. Please, stay. We'll fix this." A part of me, the small, wounded boy who still lived somewhere inside me, wanted to. That boy wanted to crumble into his arms and accept this sudden, dramatic reversal. But the man who had walked back into this room wasn't that desperate boy anymore. I had found my own backbone tonight, a spine forged in fire and neglect, and I wasn't going to let it go. I finally met his gaze. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of acknowledgement. "I see you. I hear you. Thank you." But it wasn't a nod of agreement. It wasn't enough. Not yet. I then looked past him to Marcus. My brother's face was a hollowed-out mask of horror. He was finally seeing the full scope of the wreckage he had caused, the relationships he had fractured, perhaps permanently. "This doesn't fix it," I said, my voice quiet but firm, meant only for my father and the brother standing behind him. "What you did tonight, it was just the final straw on a very big, very heavy pile." I looked straight at Marcus, pinning him with my gaze. "You owe me an explanation, a real one, but not tonight, and not here." I gave my father's hand a brief, firm squeeze, a silent thank you for his final, desperate act of courage. Then I let go of him. I turned my back on them one last time, on the wreckage of the family table, on the silent, staring guests, on my weeping mother and my broken brother and my repentant father, on the whole damn circus, and I walked out. This time no one dared to stop me. The path to the door was clear. The drive away from the country club was surreal. I didn't turn on the radio. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the loud, frantic ringing in my own ears. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy or vindicated. I just felt empty, hollowed out, like I'd just survived a major battle but hadn't had time to count the cost or tend to the wounded, and I was the only wounded. I didn't go back to the cheap, anonymous motel. I drove on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I drove to the one place in the entire state of Connecticut that had ever felt like a real home. I drove to Uncle Frank's. His lights were on, casting a warm, yellow glow onto the driveway. He opened the door before I even knocked on it, as if he'd been waiting up, a sixth sense telling him I'd be coming. He was in his old, worn flannel shirt and faded jeans, a cup of coffee in his hand. He took one long look at me, standing on his porch in my full dress blues, my face probably a mask of exhaustion and turmoil. He didn't say a word. He just set his coffee cup down on the porch railing, opened his arms wide, and pulled me into a hug. It was a rough, strong, unflinching hug, and I buried my face in his shoulder and breathed in the familiar, comforting smell of sawdust and coffee. It was the first real hug I'd had all weekend. "I knew you had it in you, kid," he mumbled into my shoulder, his voice thick. "I always knew it." We sat in his cluttered kitchen for hours, until the sky outside began to lighten from black to a deep indigo. He made a fresh pot of strong, black coffee, and I told him everything. Every single, humiliating detail. The groomsmen, the bridesmaid, the seating chart, the final confrontation with Marcus, the way our parents just sat there, my father's eventual defense. He just listened, his weathered face a mask of quiet, simmering anger and fierce, unwavering pride. He nodded in all the right places. When I finished, he just topped off my coffee cup and said, "Good, you did what you had to do. You stood your ground. That's all a man can do." Being there, in that messy, honest kitchen, was the first time I felt like I could finally truly breathe. The next few days were a blur of blessed silence. My phone blew up with dozens of texts and missed calls from my parents, from Marcus. I ignored them all. I put the phone on silent and left it on the kitchen counter. I needed the quiet. I needed to decompress. I helped Uncle Frank rebuild the carburetor on his old pickup truck, the familiar, methodical process a comforting balm to my frayed nerves. The smell of grease and metal was clean and honest. We didn't talk about the wedding again. We didn't have to. The call I finally decided to answer came 3 days after the wedding. It was Marcus. I saw his name flash on the screen and my first instinct was to hit decline. But some morbid curiosity perhaps, made me swipe right. "Hello," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. There was a long pause on the other end, just the sound of faint, staticky breathing. Then, "Ethan." Marcus's voice was completely different. The arrogance, the condescension, the easy confidence, it was all gone. He sounded hesitant, small, broken. I'm at a diner off I-95, the O'Rourke's, exit 14. I was hoping, maybe you'd meet me? Please, just for a few minutes." It was near Uncle Frank's. It was my territory. He had come to me. That was significant. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said and hung up before he could say anything else. When I walked into the diner, a classic old-school place with cracked red vinyl booths and the lingering smell of old coffee and bacon, I saw him hunched over a cup in a corner booth, staring out the window. He looked terrible. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt I'd never seen before. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he hadn't shaved. The golden boy was well and truly tarnished. I slid into the booth opposite him. The waitress came by and I ordered a black coffee. I didn't say anything to Marcus. I just waited. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. He was the one who had called the meeting. He could be the one to break the silence. "Dad told me," he finally began, his voice hoarse. He wouldn't look at me, staring instead into the black abyss of his coffee cup. "After you left, after the Hamiltons left, he told me everything. He told me about how he and Mom treated Uncle Frank when he came back from Vietnam. How they were ashamed of him because he was different. How they shut him out, didn't want him at family functions. I never knew any of that. They never talked about it." He finally dragged his gaze up from the cup and looked at me. His eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "That's what I did to you, isn't it?" he whispered. "It's the same damn thing. I became them." "Yes," I said. The word was cold and hard, but it was the truth. Yes, you did. He took a shaky breath, the sound shuddering in his chest. I kept telling myself it was because I was scared for you, that I didn't want you to get hurt over there. But that was a lie. He shook his head, a gesture of profound self-loathing. That was a complete and utter lie I told myself so I could sleep at night. The truth is, I was ashamed. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and raw and finally honest. It was the word that had been at the root of everything for our entire lives. Your life? It was so real, he continued, the words tumbling out now, clumsy and pained. The dirt, the danger, the scars. It didn't fit into the perfect little world I was trying to build for myself. The perfect career, the perfect wife, the perfect family. You were the one thing that wasn't perfect in my narrative. You were the one thing that was real, and it scared the hell out of me. Because it made me feel like a fraud. It made me feel fake. Having a hero for a brother didn't make me proud. It made me feel small. It made me feel inadequate. And I hated you for it. He finally broke down then, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old, familiar anger. But it was quickly replaced by something else. A kind of weary, hollow pity. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak, insecure man who had done a monstrous thing. I let him cry. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, watching him. When he finally composed himself, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, he reached into his jacket pocket and slid something across the table. It was a letter folded in 3. I gave a copy of this to Vanessa and her parents this morning, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I told them that I was the one who was the embarrassment that night, that I was the one who had acted without honor, that I was ashamed of how I had treated my own brother to curry favor with them. I told them that if they couldn't respect you, then they could never respect me. Vanessa, she's staying at her parents' house. I don't know if she's coming back. I stared at the letter. It was a concrete action, a sacrifice. He had potentially blown up his brand new marriage, his political connections, his entire carefully constructed life. For me, it was the first truly selfless thing I had ever seen him do. I didn't pick up the letter. I just looked at him, really looked at him, at the broken man sitting across from me. That's a start, Marcus, I said, my voice quiet, but clear. It's a start. That conversation in the diner wasn't a magic fix. It didn't have a Hollywood ending. It didn't erase 20 years of being the lesser son, the family footnote, the problem to be managed. There was no tearful hug, no dramatic, movie-style reconciliation. But it was something more real. It was a beginning. It was the first tentative stone being laid for a new foundation. A foundation built on the rubble of the lies we had all been living under for so long. I stayed with Uncle Frank for another week. The silence was finally broken. My father called every day, and we had a series of long, difficult conversations. For the first time, he apologized without making excuses. He admitted his own cowardice, his own jealousy of his brother Frank's clear-eyed certainty, and how he had let that poison the way he saw me. He admitted he had been wrong, a phrase I had never heard him utter before. My mother sent a long, rambling, tearful email. It was a mess of guilt and regret, but it was an honest mess, and for that I was grateful. I eventually went back to my base, back to my life, back to my men. The world of country clubs and political dinners and passive aggression faded away again, feeling more like a strange, half-remembered dream than ever. I focused on my work. In my off hours, I found a new sense of purpose helping Uncle Frank get a local chapter of a veterans support group off the ground. We spent our weekends fixing up an old, disused community hall, patching drywall, painting walls, turning it into a place where vets could come, have a cup of coffee, and just talk to people who understood their language, who had walked in their boots. It felt more real and more important than any law firm or Senate seat. About 3 months after the wedding, a small, flat package arrived for me at the base. Inside was a simple silver picture frame. The photo was of the Mitchell family, my parents and Marcus, sitting around the dining room table at home. They weren't smiling for the camera. It was a candid shot, likely taken by my mother. They were just talking. And next to Marcus, there was an empty chair, its back straight, its place at the table undeniable. Taped to the back of the frame was a short note in Marcus's familiar, perfect handwriting. "This chair is always here for you, whenever you're ready." I looked at that photo for a long time. I thought about the empty chair at the wedding reception, the one that had symbolized my exclusion, my shame. And now this one, the one that symbolized a permanent, unconditional invitation. I still haven't sat in that chair. I don't know when I will. The wounds are deep, and they are healing slowly on their own time. But for the first time, I feel like I have a choice. The power is mine. My relationship with my family, if it is to be rebuilt, will be rebuilt on my terms, on a foundation of honesty and the hard-won respect I commanded that night. In the end, I didn't get the blind acceptance I thought I always wanted. Instead, I got something infinitely more valuable. I got self-respect. I learned that you can't wait for other people to see your worth. You have to see it in yourself first. You have to be willing to put on your own uniform, whatever that may be, and stand your ground, even if you have to stand alone. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. The world can be a tough place, and sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with the people we're supposed to love the most, in the places we're supposed to feel safest. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between being accepted and being your true self? Please, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Take care of yourselves and each other,